Good morning, welcome to Commodity Classic. I'm Craig Dick, VP of Sales and Marketing with Phospholutions. I grew up on my family's farm in Nebraska, and I currently live outside of Lincoln. And started my farming career in the 1980s. Who here else started farming in the 80s? Got anybody that started farming in the 70s? A couple of them. Anybody started in the 60s? Got one guy over here. One on the back, but there you go. So is there anything today you're doing on your farm that's like the 1960s from your production practices?
Don't use the whole board plow anymore.
Yeah, doesn't use a plow anymore. So, you know, since the 60s, a lot on the farm has changed. You know, bigger grain handling facilities, new seed genetics, different chemistries. Most of us don't drive our grandpa's truck. We've upgraded to new technology to drive efficiency on the farm. Sometimes technology doesn't work. Most of the time it's better. Old practices we put out to the pasture and forget about them. We've adopted newer technologies so we can get more done on the farm. Old practices we abandon. Adopting precision technology, variable rate placement to be more efficient and drive profitability. But yet most of us are still using the same phosphate fertilizers that were widely adopted in the 1960s, MAP and DAP. Well, we think it's time for Rhizosorb. It's the new industry standard for phosphate efficiency. We can improve phosphate uptake by 50%. This results in improved ROI on your farm up to $20 an acre compared to MAP or DAP. It reduces nutrient tie-up, and you don't have to change anything about your program. It can be strip-tilled, it can be row placed, it can be broadcasted. It's simply a replacement for your MAP and DAP. It can lower your carbon index score, and it can potentially qualify for EQIP grant. It's more sustainable, it reduces runoff and leaching of phosphate. So, most of you are saying, hey, what's wrong with MAP? I've been using this forever. It works just fine. And the problem with phosphate is that your conventional phosphate fertilizer gets tied up in less than 30 days after application. It gets tied up by soil organic matter, carbon, aluminum, iron, and other metals in your soil. Phosphorus does not like to be in an ionic form. It's going to tie up with something. When it ties up, we call this the fixed pool or non-labile pool, and that's where most of your phosphate gets locked up. This phosphate is not easily available to your plant. Only 10 to 30% of your first year application of phosphate is available to the plant. We call this the active pool or the labile pool of phosphate. This active pool or labile pool is what feeds the soluble pool of your crop, soluble pool of your soil solution. And only about 2% of all your phosphorus is available in this pool, and this is the only way your plant takes up phosphate. So as a young agronomist, it's pounded into your brain how important early season phosphate is for plant vigor and germination, getting that plant off to a good start. And you need to get the plant off to a good start to realize your highest yield potential. But what we never talk about is that phosphorus is just like nitrogen and sulfur. This curve is very similar. You need a certain amount of phosphate every day of that plant's life to maximize yield. And about 75% of all your phosphorus is taken up after reproduction. But when we apply MAP and DAP, it gets locked up in the soil in 30 days. And so by the time we get to that reproduction stage, that plant can be starving for phosphorus. It'll grow faster and take more phosphate out of the soil solution than soils can replenish it. So our current management challenges include this idea that fall broadcasting phosphate can be stored and released later in season. And honestly, that's like a low-interest CD. You'll get your money back eventually, but the returns are really poor. It can take up to 9 years for your applied phosphate to be cycled through and get that out of your soil. In our current soil testing framework, and why we make the applications we do, are based off of correlation studies. So millions of acres, millions of soil tests over thousands of acres. We've looked at how much phosphate was applied and what the yield response is. And it leads to a correlation curve. And that tends to lead to higher application rates of phosphate so that we can make sure we have enough phosphate in that soil pool to feed the plant. And what we don't measure is the soil's rate of release of phosphate. Now, our USDA soil research government scientists, they are studying this. And in the future, we'll have that test. But for today, what we do is we apply excess phosphate to make sure we have plant available phosphate, and it leads to a leaky system. It's also expensive to do this. You know, you can spend hundreds of dollars building that soil P level up so that we have enough soluble phosphate in the soil solution. But then that excess phosphate runs off, leaches, and contributes to algae blooms. So at Phospholutions, what we believe is sustainable production and responsible use of phosphorus is fundamental for high yields and profitability on the farm. And for us, it's not just about sustainability. That's great, but it's got to be profitable for you guys to implement sustainable practices on the farm, or they'll never get implemented. So what Rhizosorb is made at large-scale MAP production plants. It's embedded directly into conventional dry phosphate sources like MAP and DAP. It mimics natural soil chemistry's ability to release and store phosphorus. And it's based off a proprietary plant-driven release based off of chemical gradients. So what does that mean? It means that as a plant is growing and pulling soil phosphorus out of the soil solution, Rhizosorb will release phosphate, which is loosely bound to it, on a one-to-one basis. So it essentially improves that active pool of phosphate and ensures that the plant has adequate phosphate throughout the growing season. We also slightly slow the release of that phosphorus solubilization compared to MAP and extend that availability of phosphorus out to about 90 days so that the plant has more phosphorus when it actually needs it. So in conventional phosphate sources, when we apply our phosphate, about 10 to 30%, let's call it 25%, is available for plant uptake. With Rhizosorb, we improve phosphate availability to the plant by about 50% or 2x. So we can apply slightly less phosphate, but show the plant the same amount or more phosphate. So about now is when people say, hey, that all sounds great, but I don't know if I really believe you. So I want to back up and talk about the Rhizosorb development history. This is a technology that was developed by a Penn State researcher who was world-renowned for studying root architecture and phosphate movement in the soil. He developed it in the 90s, and they used it in horticulture research. In 2016, A undergraduate named Hunter Swisher, our current CEO, was in Dr. Lynch's class, and he heard about all the problems with phosphorus. That in the US, mine reserves are severely limited. One country controls 70% of the known reserves. Problems with algae blooms, the problem with pricing that we've seen the last couple years. And so Hunter decided that, asked Dr. Lynch, well, how come you're not doing anything with this? And Dr. Lynch is an amazing researcher. He's not an entrepreneur, he's not a businessman. So he told Hunter, you can go license the IP from the university and commercialize the product. So that semester, he went down and licensed the technology from Penn State, sold the original product out of the back of his car, won some startup grants, and formed a company. And in 2018, he developed an R&D research team of PhDs who studied it in small plot trials. And since 2016, we have over 450 small plot trials, greenhouse tests, and small plot replicated tests. In 2021, we moved to field trials. And then last year at Commodity Classic, we launched this to ag retail. So some of the multi-year studies that we've done at universities, we've done year-over-year small plot replicated, looking at the yield results, the tissue tests, and the impact of soil. And you can see that on average, using Rhizosorb and applying 50% less P2O5 on a per acre basis, we have very similar yields, very similar tissue tests, and very similar soil levels over those 4 and 5 year periods. Also in our rate tests, we're able to show that if you don't apply a MAP or you apply a 50% rate of phosphorus as MAP, it will impact your yields. And that Rhizosorb is improving the plant's ability to access phosphorus with lower applied rates. So on our large-scale field trials, over the past 3 years, it's been tested on over 140 trial locations across 16 states. On average, we'll have an 83% win rate. And typically, we'll see about a 1.6% yield increase. But in Iowa in 2022, we did see a 4.9 bushel per acre increase over 31 sites. So we can see a slight yield increase when using Rhizosorb. As I mentioned, Rhizosorb 839O is our commercial product. It's made at large-scale MAP and DAP plants around the country. We inject Rhizosorb into the manufacturing stream. We reduce a little bit of the ammonia that goes in, so that's where we get the 839O. Rhizosorb is a proprietary blend of metal oxides, and it has to be incorporated into the homogeneous prill at a fairly high rate so we get that consistent response. And it will work and handle exactly like you're used to with your MAP and DAP, but we'll have a 38% lower salt index. The reason we partner with the large manufacturers is they make millions of tons, they're billion-dollar facilities. We can help them lower their carbon footprint and provide you product on a scale that you need and at a cost that's palatable for the grower. So on farm, here's an example of if you're applying 1152O at say 100 pounds per acre, at today's pricing, that's about $40 per acre. With Rhizosorb 839O, we would reduce that amount of actual product by 33% and apply 66 pounds per acre for a $36 per acre cost or a $4 per acre savings, approximately 10%. Looking at a 1.6 bushel advantage on average on a 200 bushel corn crop, you could realize another $16 per acre revenue or a $20 ROI by switching from MAP to Rhizosorb. Rhizosorb is not a biological. It works on chemical concentration gradients in the soil, so we get a very consistent response. And, you know, with this savings, this will allow you to find that next yield limiting factor. For most growers, phosphate is not yield limiting, meaning the more phosphate you apply, you can apply more phosphate, but you're not going to get more yield. What you'll get is a bigger plant with the same amount of yield. It's called luxury consumption. So if we optimize for plant uptake of phosphorus, we can now focus on that next thing. And I'm sure there's something here you guys are thinking about wanting to add to your program that you haven't figured out yet how to pay for. So we have engineered the product so that you can see a savings and go after those yield limiting factors. With all the testing that we've done and feedback from growers who say, oh, this sounds great, but I'm not sure I really trust you. Heard a lot of this before. We have the Rhizosorb Grower Guarantee. This is a warranty-backed program. And you can use this QR code to go ahead and register. And if you enroll by March 31st and apply up to 200 acres, minimum of 200 acres on corn, by June, the end of June, and maintain an active multi-peril crop insurance policy, we will warranty non-performance up to $40 an acre. And whether you win or whether you have a winning trial or a losing trial, you upload your yield data, we'll pay you $1,000. Over my career, I don't know how many growers I've talked to that said, everybody wants my data, but nobody wants to pay for it. We know it's a pain in the rear end to go out to your combine in December and pull your yield data. So this whole program's all app-based. You'll get instructions after enrolling, and we'll make it very easy for you to upload your maps. So this just happened here about 2 weeks ago, and it's an opportunity for you to further save by using Rhizosorb. Rhizosorb was approved as an enhanced efficiency fertilizer, or EEF, in the state of Pennsylvania. What that means is it now qualifies for EQIP grants. And EQIP grants provides financial assistance for using sustainable practices. It could be somewhere between $10 to $60 an acre, depending on your practices. And we are working with the national group as well as other states. So hopefully by this time next year, we'll be approved in your state. So sustainability is a primary mission for us, so we have to touch on this. We're one of the only fertilizers I'm aware of that has a life cycle analysis. So this is a third-party consulting group that has looked at our product from manufacturing to field, and they have shown that we can reduce carbon emissions by 45%. In a separate study, we've shown that we can reduce runoff potential by 78% and leaching by 84%. Sustainability is great. We all want to work for that, but what does that mean for a corn farmer? Anybody here heard of this 45Z clean fuel product credit? So this is a government program that incentivizes our ethanol plants to grow low carbon fuels. They get a tax credit. It's potentially worth billions to them. There's a law passed by Congress. They're working to implement it, and by next year, they hope to have it implemented and the ethanol plants getting their tax credits. Lowering your carbon index, or CI score, by 1 point could be worth $0.50 per bushel. Rhizosorb compared to MAP can lower your carbon footprint by 45%. We've documented this. We've got to take it to the government to get it approved, but what that means is that 45% reduction on farm means we could reduce your carbon index score up to 0.3 of a point. I know that doesn't sound big, but on a 220 bushel corn crop, it could be worth $3.50 an acre if we can get the ethanol plants to pay you guys a premium for having a low carbon index. I'm definitely not an expert on this, so make sure you stop by the Renewable Fuels booth or Uncommon Farms booth and talk to Continuum Ag. Those are some good experts that can help educate you on this. And talk to your ethanol producers when you get home about this. This could be potentially a very big thing where if you go from the average of 29 down to 0, which a lot of guys have, you're talking $400 or $500 an acre premium potential. So as we wrap up, I'd ask you to do 3 things for me. Please stop by our booth, 7627, meet our sales reps, talk to our technical agronomist, Brian Reinecke. While you're there, you can register to win this amazing tractor or combine toolbox, the AgStorm Field Seal Toolbox. It comes in green, red, and black. You can get a combine edition. You can get one for your tractor, and we'll ship it to you if you win. Number 3, as I mentioned, we distribute through ag retail. So when you go home, ask your retailer about Rhizosorb. We've probably already talked to them, and they can get it for you. As I said, we manufacture at scale. We've got product in the warehouses across the Midwest, ready for them to come pick it up and help you get your 200 acres of grower guarantee product out. So with that, I think we've got a little bit of time left. And Brian, if you want to join me, we're happy to entertain some questions if anybody has one. This is Brian Reinecke, our Director of Agronomy.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
How's it working high pH ground, like 7.5?
Yeah.
So according to the studies that we have implemented already, across the pH scale, there's actually an improved ability for solubility to keep it moving into the plant over and above MAP. So it's really not affected by any range of pH.
All pH ranges, we improve crop uptake of phosphate, even at the high pHs.
Turn it up a little bit. Yes, sir.
How many states is it actually available?
So we are approved in every state in the country except Maryland and California, which we are in process of getting that done. We're also on month 19, I think, of a 12-month process to get approved in Canada. So hope to get approved in Canada soon. Warehouses, product is primarily in the Midwest, but we can ship anywhere in the country.
Have you done any research on wheat as far as
Yeah, so the primary crops that we're focused on at this point is corn, soybeans, wheat. We do have and canola. Yeah, and we're starting to move into some other crops here in crop year 20. This is 24, crop year 24. So yes.
And if you want to come by our booth, we've got trial data on those other crops.
Yeah. Application-wise, in wheat drills, air seeders, you can put it on in a twin bend. You can put it on in a blend through your air seeder if you're doing it that way. And I don't know if you all saw the map that Craig had up there, but that gives you an indication of our footprint. Our current footprint extends from near the Canadian border, North Dakota, all the way out to Chesapeake Bay, across the Midwest, the Midwest states. And that's where the bulk of our trials have been going on over the last several years. So we have a lot of data and a lot of information centered around everything from the efficacy, the solubility, the plant uptake, and overall the return and what your crops look like. Other questions? Yes.
So, my knowledge of what I see from the oil phosphorus problem, most of the time
Yeah, it's so Rhizosorb electrostatically binds or holds phosphate loosely to it. And so that slows the release into the soil solution, which slows the release into soil solution where phosphate is going to tie up. And it doesn't fully solve it, it just extends that release time so that we can get more phosphate into the plant when it's actually taking up and needing the most amount of phosphate.
Your biggest deterrence to phosphorus availability, I mean, it comes from soil structure, but primarily from your pHs. There's a very, very small window of maximum availability on a pH scale to where phosphorus is actually soluble and available in that available pool that Craig talked about. Calcium, iron, aluminum, magnesium, those are the biggest contributors along the pH scale that have the most effect on your phosphorus efficiencies. And the other thing that I have seen through my career, 30-some years now, and the more soil tests and reports that I see all across North America, I have come to realize, I mean, current soil testing standards are what they are, and they're widely accepted, but as Craig mentioned, it takes into the average responses and the average levels of everything. And what I have seen is that there is more fertilizer in all of our soils that you all farm than we know is there based on how we test it today. Common conventional production practices have led us to, well, let's just add more to get a greater response. We all know what the genetic potential is of our seed hybrids, our corn, soybeans, but more is not better. There's things that we have to begin to implement today centered around the sustainability message or just the microclimate of what we're all doing on our local farming operations to help us improve our soils from a biological perspective, physical perspective, and a chemical perspective so that we can continue to get those larger crops that we're looking for and then pass it to the next generation. I mean, that's what most of us in here are all about. We run our businesses so that we have something to give to our kids and grandkids. And it's all about, I think a lot of it has to do with stewardship. So if we get better at understanding soils, we can change a lot. I mean, I know there's some consultants in here that probably think that way. I know you guys do. It's all about education. So this is what we really strive to do at Phospholutions, is educate and bring new information to you guys so that you can improve what you're doing. It's not that you're doing a bad job. Science is getting better and we're learning more.
Other questions?
Yes.
So the product helps make phosphorus less, doesn't tie up as quickly.
Yeah.
Does it move through the soil any further than because of that? Or?
It's not going to move any differently than standard phosphate forms. The way phosphate moves mostly is through water movement and soil particles down through our tile drains and our slopes, our terraces, and everything else.
It will slightly
slow it down.
Phosphorus solubilizing and moving with the water, but phosphorus moving in the soil doesn't really change that dynamic a whole lot.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to repeat the question so everybody can hear it. Question was asked, what is the environmental persistence of Rhizosorb and what happens to it over time? So Rhizosorb is a naturally mined mineral. It is essentially insoluble. So when we put it into our production process, that's what activates it and allows the phosphate to adsorb to it. Over time, through natural soil processes of cycling phosphorus in and out, taking on water, taking on microbes, other stuff is going to start attaching to it over time. It's going to revert back to its naturally mined state. Rhizosorb, the technical Rhizosorb, it's OMRI listed. So it's very safe, it's inert in its natural state. And even in the phosphate state, when it's put into phosphorus, we've done some extensive testing on safety and what it does in the soil, and we've seen, to this point, no negative effects. Doesn't impact biologicals. In fact, If you got a biological you love and really like using that you coat on your fertilizer, it works great on this product. You can coat whatever you want on this, and we've seen no negative impact of coating biologicals with Rhizosorb.
If you have a real high phosphorus reading in your soil test, will it have any effect on that phosphorus test that's there historically?
Question was, if you have high phosphorus test soils, does that help or impact what's going on there? You want to take that one, Brian?
Not that we have seen, but what it does do, even in high testing pea soils, we're still using a little bit of phosphorus, right? Because it's about feeding the crop. What's in our soils is going to naturally go through its process biologically and chemically over time. Your plant and your crop is growing at a much faster rate than your soils can ever mineralize nutrients. And as we go through the season, I hope I'm answering your question, as we go through the season, that natural mineralization is still going to occur, but it's not going to meet the plant demand. And where Rhizosorb comes in and fits that scenario is it stays in that available solution, electrostatically held by the Rhizosorb mineral, so that it feeds through water. You obviously got to have water sources in your soil to feed that crop. So a high testing, in our studies, in a high testing greater than 40 part per million Bray test, we're still using Rhizosorb at a 50% rate to what you would normally use in that high testing soil situation. Good question.
How much time do we have left?
You're at
8:50. 5 more. How much time do we have left for the
next presentation is at 9.
9? We got time for a couple more questions if anybody has them. Well, again, appreciate everybody coming out and talking to us. Please come by our booth, 7627. If you got more questions or want to see more research and trial data. Thank you all. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.